أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone. I think this is session 19 and inshallah our discussion continues from the topic on the lives of man, and this is going to be the second half of the second half of the second portion of man's existence, which is we covered in the previous session life, and so we'll be looking at death today, inshallah. And death is a really interesting thing. It's something that philosophers and poets and in recent ages now scientists have really tried to rationalize, to try and understand what is death, why does death happen, and no one can really come up with a straight answer as to what it is. The most that people can come close to is to provide some sort of rationale as to how death occurs in the material causes of it. But other than that, cannot provide any more than an existential reason, a metaphysical reason as to why death is. And really, death is a part of living. It's all based on what sort of perspective one gives death. How you examine death or how you perceive it will determine how you realize your being in this state of existence. It is similar to wakefulness, and sleep is the same, has the same similarity to living and dying. They are two halves of the same, like night and day. And what's astounding with all previous cultures, all ancient civilizations, all had a profound realization of death. They had an awe for death. They had a sense of, not in the morbid sense of thinking about death, but in the sense of regarding it with some esteem. It's just in the recent centuries, the modern age has sort of turned into a death denial culture. Defiance of death, or attempting to defy death, and trying to find means by which it can be conquered in a sense. And death is unlike that at all. The Prophet ﷺ spoke a lot about death, and you will find this in the text, in the book that is translated, Imam al-Haddad's text. You'll find numerous hadith that have been put in there, all speaking about death in one sense or another. Because death is something that it has its own nobility. It is something that is to be examined in a sense of awe itself. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna al-Mawta faza'un, fa'idha ra'aytumul jinaza faqumu." Death has a certain fear, as an awe to it. It's an awesome thing. Not awesome in the sense of marvelous and wonderful, but awesome in the sense though it demands a sense of realization of it. So when you see a funeral, when you see a janaza, stand in respect. Give it its due respect. The modern world has lost that respect. And I'm not only talking about the sacrilegious, the kuffar, the non-believers, the secularists. I'm also talking about Muslims in particular have lost this sense of awe towards death. In a very interesting hadith, you will find the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, "Yushikul umamu an tada'a alaykum kama tada'a al-akalatu ila qas'atiha." Your enemies are going to descend upon you. They are going to consume you the way somebody consumes a plate of food. And the Sahaba, very out of their innocence, asked a very interesting question against that. They said, وَمِنْ قِلَّةِ نَحْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ. Is it that we're going to be few on that day, when that age comes, when that time comes? And it's a very interesting question because it's a logistical question. See, when one force overcomes another force, it's based on two merits. Either that force is stronger than the force that is being conquered, or it is more in number than that force. So either it is bigger and stronger and more forceful, or it is many in number, because the greater numbers tend to overcome the fewer numbers. You see? But they're not asking about whether the enemy is stronger than them. They're asking whether the enemy is more in number than them. That becomes a logistical question. And the Prophet ﷺ responded to that by saying, "Bal antum yawma'idin kathirun." Rather, you're going to be many in number. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ غُثَاءٌ كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. But you're going to be like the froth of the water that moves in torrents. You know, when you look at a river that is running over rocks, it's turbulating, or like a waterfall, or like the waves crashing on the beach. There's that foam that's created from that. He's saying you're going to be like that. In some translations, ghutha also means scum. The derogatory term that was originated in England in the early, I believe, 1700s, used to denote the numerous individuals who are like street urchins, you know, scum, meaning useless insofar as society is concerned, meaningless. And he said, وَلِيَنْزِعَنَّ اللَّهُ مِنْ صُدُورِ عَدُوِّكُمْ الْمَهَابَ مِنْكُمْ وَلَيَقْذِفَنَّ اللَّهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ الْوَهَنَ. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to take away fear of you from the hearts of your enemies. Where your enemies are in awe of you right now, Allah is going to take that fear away from them. Meaning they're no longer going to see you in awe. They're no longer going to have this sense of fear. If you look back in history, the Muslim civilization was a feared civilization. It was a feared civilization, not because of the might of the sword alone, not because of military power and strength, not because of infrastructure, but because, as Franz Rosenthal attributes in his book, I forgot the title, that the Muslim civilization had but one objective: the pursuit, the preservation, and the transmission of knowledge, which is what gave the Muslims this integrity that the rest of the world was in awe of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take that awe away from them. And He's going to cast into your hearts something that He called al-wahan. Now, wahan is weakness. Wahan is weakness. But the way he says it here, he uses it in the definite article, al-wahan, the weakness. And so the Sahaba asked against that, Ya Rasulullah, wama al-wahan? What is this wahan? What is the wahan? What is this weakness that you're talking about? And the Prophet ﷺ gives a statement, an answer that is comprehensive of human nature itself. He said, Rasulullah, Hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut. Love of the worldly life and a hatred of death. Love of dunya and a hatred of death. Now, psychologically, hatred is often associated or is linked directly to fear. This is where you get the term phobia from. A phobia is typically because emotions are exhibitive and inhibitive. So whatever is exhibited has got something that is inhibited directly linked to it. So hatred is exhibited when fear is inhibited. Meaning when you have got fear in you, if you're afraid of something, you will naturally come to hate it. And we always hate that which we do not understand. Likewise, we fear that which we do not know. The fear of the unknown. He's referring in this case to the second aspect of that twofold question, or the twofold conclusion. Is it because the enemy is stronger, or is it because they are many in number? No, they are not many in number. You are many in number, but they are stronger than you because you have become like them. Hubbud dunya, you have associated yourselves with the world and you have separated yourselves from death. And you find this, a lot of Muslims are like that. They're very much afraid of death. They are in love with the dunya. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them, especially those in particular who like to profess their faith, that they are better than others in their righteousness. And He challenges them in Surah Al-Baqarah, you'll find the ayah. If you think that you are closest to Allah, فَتَمَنَّعُ الْمَوْتِ, why don't you desire death? In kuntum sadiqeen, if you are truthful, if you are right in your claim, that you are closer to Allah min dunin nas than the rest of mankind. And a similar statement was given to the Jews as well. If you think that you are the chosen ones of God, better than the rest of mankind, then desire death. But they will not desire death. Why? Because of what their hands have put forth. In other words, because of what they do, because of the actions that you exhibit, because of the lifestyle that you're living. You've lost the sight of the horizon, the great horizon that is approaching. Now, I want to look at two things here, inshallah. I want to look at the transition between life and death, what we know as Sakarat al-Mawt. And then I want to look at two main types of death. There are actually more. There is a bodily death, but I want to look more at something called a spiritual death and a psychological death. A bodily death, a psychological death, and then a spiritual death. Now, Sakaratul Maut, Sakara is an interesting word. If you look, many of the dictionaries will give you a rendering of Sakara, Sakaratul Maut as the pain of death. If you some of the ayat, translations will tell you the pangs of death, which is true. It's got a pain to it. But Sakara, in its root term, actually means intoxication. And it's also the same word from which you get the word sukkar, which is sugar. In Turkish, they say shakar. It's because sugar has got a type of intoxication. Sugar is one of the main ingredients that is used in the fermentation of wines and alcohol and all that. Sugar has a type of intoxication. Now, intoxication, there are two aspects of intoxication. If you look at human normal functionality of the human being is usually in a moderate spectrum, right? In a balance in between. Then you've got extreme states on either side. On the one side, you've got what you would call a euphoric state or an ecstatic state, an exhilarated state. On the other side, you've got something that would be more of a stasis, which is sort of lethargic. So if you look, a substance like cocaine will make somebody hyperactive in that sense, whereas a substance like opium will make that person completely, you would say that person is wasted, right? Alcohol can inhibit one or the other depending on the nature and the temperament of the individual. It can make the person all up and active and wild, or it can make the person completely, knock them out in a sense. I don't know what the word is for that because I've never had alcohol. wasted here. The concept here is that Sakaratul Mawt, Sakara, is also an intoxication, which is why you'll find other translations will say the intoxication of death. Intoxication here means a separation of the soul from the body. It's a separation of the soul from the body, a desynchronicity. This is why because children, their bodies are still growing, their souls are constantly adapting to the changes of the body. And so children will often have this sort of split, separation taking place. Often, sometimes induced by small things like sugar, for example, will make a child hyperactive, right? And other things will make the child completely sleep off or something like that. It's causing a sort of a separation, a desynchronicity between body and soul. What was I going to say? The sakara is, so you've got a natural state of intoxication, which is what you experience even when you're going to sleep, a desynchronicity, and sakaratul maut, which is a complete desynchronicity. There is no return back. So when a desynchronicity like this happens, it is either forced by the use of substance. You take in a substance and that causes a dramatic change in the body's configuration. Whether it is neural, whether it is related to the muscle system, or whatever it may be related to, whichever substance attacks whichever region, the body shifts and the soul gets desynchronized. That is an induced intoxication, an induced sakara. And then you've got a natural sakara, which is like maut now in this case, right? Now, in any type of intoxication, the soul over time, once the body resettles back into its natural formation, the soul re-inhibits the body and comes back in. So you recover back from a state of intoxication. But maut is such that once the desynchronicity takes place, it can no longer be synchronized. It cannot come back. This is why overdosing on a drug will cause permanent desynchronicity, i.e. death. When you overdose on any drug, then there is a permanent desynchronicity and it becomes death. One of the meanings of sakara is also poison. Poison. Because that's what a poison does. It causes the body to undergo a dramatic transformation in a very short span of time that causes a desynchronicity from which the soul can no longer come back and re-inhibit. Now, I'm going to read out the definition of sakara from Imam Ragab al-Isfahani's Al-Mufradat. He gives a beautiful rendering of some of the terms as they are used in the Quran. He says, السكر حالة تعرض بين المرء وعقله. As-sukr is, he says, is a state of exposure between the individual and his rationality. So intoxication, what it does is it causes a desynchronicity, because it causes a desynchronicity between soul and body. The aql, the intellect, is no longer merged with the brain, which is its faculty of rationality. In order for the intellect to rationalize the symbols and interpret them correctly, it needs the instrument by which it can rationalize those symbols. And this is why the dreams are irrational, because when you sleep, the soul is detached from the body. The aql does not have access to the brain in order to formulate the set algorithms, the logic of rationality. Intoxication does the same thing. It causes the synchronicity between the individual and his ability to rationalize. It causes a sort of a veil. That's why anyone who is in a state of intoxication is prohibited from coming into salah. Because to be in salah, you have to be rational. And to be rational is to be conscious. Or rather, to be conscious is to be in a state of sobriety and rationality. Because you're a being who is existent by the ordainment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a rational realm. And so to be irrational is to go against that ordinance. And then he says, وَأَكْثَرُ مَا يُسْتَعْمَلُ ذَلِكَ فِي الشَّرَابِ. And much of it can be, is typically induced by sharab, wine and alcohol and all that. Much of intoxication is induced by that. Not all of it. You find other things are now, more and more things are now coming up. These things like what is it called? Methamphetamine or something? What is it called? Meth, crystal meth, These things, these are recent. Cocaine, these are recent things that have come up. In the past, they used to smoke hashish and opium and these kinds of things, which also induced intoxication. But the most common is induced by alcohol. وَقَدْ يَعْتَرِي مِنَ الْغَضَبِ وَالْعِشْقِ. And these are all, and these are induced, the state, those who are not induced by substance, because like I said, it can be induced by substance or a natural state. So while in the living aspect, intoxication can also be induced in a natural state, typically by anger or by intimate lust or erotic lust or love that is erotic. Ghadab or ishq, which is a sort of attractiveness. When you fall in love, all rationality goes out the window, right? If you've ever read the poetry of people who are in love, it's rubbish. It doesn't really, but the person who is writing it at that time, to him, they're in a euphoric state, right? That's a sort of intoxication. There's no rationality to what they're doing. And then ghadab, anger, you're in an ecstatic state. There's no rationality at that point. That is also called Sakarat. It's a form of intoxication. وَلِذَلِكَ قَالَ الشَّاعِرُ, as the poet said, Sukran. Actually, Anna yufiqu fatan bihi sukran. The youth cannot be saved from two types of intoxication. The young person. Sukra hawa wa sukru mudama. The intoxication of his desires and the intoxication of wine or substance. The intoxication of desire and the intoxication of substance. So the natural state of intoxication and then the induced state of intoxication. The youth, that's what the poet said. There are two types. There is that which is naturally induced, and then there is that which is induced forcefully by the taking of substance. وَمِنْهُ سَكَرَاتُ الْمَوْتِ قَالَ تَعَالَى وَجَاءَتْ سَكَرَاتُ الْمَوْتِ in Surah Al-Qaf. And then from that now there is Sakaratul Mawt. There is the intoxication of death. In Surah Al-Qaf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاءَتْ سَكَرَاتُ الْمَوْتِ. Do I have that here? Yeah, okay. And there comes now to him the intoxication of death, which is the final intoxication. As-sukru, qala Allah ta'ala. No, sorry, that's the wrong section. Was-sakru, habsul ma. And the other word is was-sakru. As-sakru is the withholding of water. وَذَلِكَ بِاعْتِبَارِ مَا يَعْرِضُ مِنَ السَّدِّ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَعَقْلِهِ. Like when you build a dam that causes a sort of a separation between, it's like a prevention. It prevents, sakara is intoxication, prevents the individual from his rationality. It blocks the individual away from his rationality. وَالسَّكْرُ الْمَوْضُعِ وَالسَّكْرُ الْمَوْضِعُ مَوْضِعُ الْمَسْدُودِ وَقَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى. So this is like a place of holding, a place of where something is withheld. In engineering, there is a technical term, sikrun habisun. Like it's a stop valve. When you have a stop valve in engineering, it's called sikrun habisun. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا from Surah Al-Hijr. Indeed, their eyes, our eyes have been dazzled. Our eyes have been illusioned. This hallucination that you're seeing, This is what Sakarat does. So intoxication causes a form of induced hallucination. Induced intoxication causes this hallucination. You're seeing your own things. Because once again, the intellect, it's not the eyes that are seeing. Remember, the eyes are just one point of seeing. The final is the being. What is the being seeing? But because there's a veil between his soul and his body, an induced veil, he's seeing his own things. Your illusion, you're seeing a hallucination. That hallucination is not external. It is the imago that is affected, the image that is formed in the mind, induced by that. قِيلَ هُوَ مِنَ السَّكْرِ وَقِيلَ هُوَ مِنَ السُّكْرِ. So this is the one like who is said, he's drunk or he's intoxicated, right? He's in a state of illusion. وَلَيْلَةٌ سَاكِرَةٌ. The Arabs used to say, لَيْلَةٌ سَاكِرَةٌ. One of the meanings of Sakara is also, like I said, you can either be in an extremely euphoric state or be completely gone, right? Still and motionless. So they used to say the night is still in that sense. Laylatun sakiratun. Not that the night is intoxicated, but the night is still. Or they used to say rihun sakiratun. The wind is still. It's not turbulating. Ay sakinatun i'tibaran bisukun al-arid min as-sukr. Meaning that it is not turbulating. It is not, because you can either be in a euphoric state or you can be completely depleted. And so this is corresponding with the soul of the configuration of the soul insofar as the lower desires are concerned. Because the intellect wants to rationalize. It's always looking to rationalize. But it's being prevented because there is a disconnect. And so the intellect is in a state of confusion. And what's being aggravated in this case is the shahwa and the ghadab. Either it is overly inflated, a euphoric state, or it is completely depleted. These are the two aspects of the soul that are affected, because now the person is completely disconnected from his reality. If you look at Sakara in the metaphysics of the language, if you take Sakara and you change the sin and kaf, you get kasara, which means to sever, to break. That's connoting that desynchronicity. The soul is parted from the body. If you replace the kaf and the ra, you get sarraka, which is a kind of a delight, ecstatic delight. The soul feels a kind of joy when it is in that state. And a lot of people take these kinds of things, which, for one, yes, you might not find something direct in the Sharia or in the fiqh that says it's haram, and so they manipulate that to justify their taking of a substance. It puts them in this state, and some of them actually end up in such a state that there is complete desynchronicity between body and soul. They start seeing aspects of reality that are metaphysical in nature but cannot be rationalized. And so they say, oh, I had a spiritual trip, or something like that, whatever words they use. I had a good trip or something like that. You see, they think that they had a spiritual experience, but it's not a spiritual experience. If you cannot rationalize it, it is not a spiritual experience. A spiritual experience is something that you can understand. Whether you understand it in the causal aspect of it, meaning you can put 2 and 2 together to form an equation as far as it's concerned, or you just understand it in a sense of deep realization. But it has to be understood. If it's not understood, if you can't pinpoint what those objects are, what those things are that you're seeing, then it's not a spiritual experience. You're in a state of delusion. Some of the Sufiya end up putting themselves in similar states when they overdo the dhikr that they usually do. It puts them in this euphoric state. They go into ecstatic states, uncontrollable states, and they think that they're having these spiritual experiences, but they're not really having spiritual experiences. All that is happening in that instance is that there is a disconnect between your soul and your body, which means you are not hadir, you're ghaib. You're gone. You're not conscious and you're not realizing the state of being that you are in. When it comes to death, the realization is full and final and complete. There's no realization, there's no rationalization that needs to take place, because the Sakarat in this instance is taking you entirely and wholesomely from this worldly existence into the next state of existence, which is a state that the soul belongs to. And that is why in that state, the dhawq, which is the tasting, the experiential understanding or the experiential realization of the state you are in is a complete affirmation. It's got no rationale. There's no possibilities that you will, am I really dying? Is this what death is? Is it like this or is it like that? It's a complete understanding. You fully realize in that moment that this is it. You've crossed over. There's no coming back from that. There's no returning back from that. You know that it is death. This is why Heidegger, if you're familiar with Heidegger's philosophy, his entire philosophy is structured around the concept of death. He argues that death is the only real thing that you will do entirely by yourself. Nothing can influence it. You will experience it in its wholesomeness entirely by yourself. Death is the act, and dying is the action that you will perform. And nothing can influence that. Everything else that you're going to do in life is influenced from one source or another, whether physical or metaphysical, material or spiritual. Whether you read it in books or you are influenced by your environments, the company that you keep, whatever it is that is around you is going to influence your thoughts in one sense or form or another. Because that's all information coming in, and that constructs the language that is internal, to build the rationality of it and the understanding of it. And so language defines your thoughts, and then thoughts define your worldview. And then that worldview is what you will cultivate. So whatever it is that comes in is going to ultimately determine what you bring out. This is why you have to be careful about what you bring into you, what sort of language you're imbibing within you. But death is the only real thing that you're going to experience entirely by itself. And nothing can influence that. And so in that moment of Sakarat, you are tasting true reality. This is why Ghazali speaks about that and says, at that moment, all the veils are lifted. You're no longer looking at reality through senses. That veil is gone. You're no longer forming an imago in the mind to try and put the picture in perspective. That veil is also gone. So you're seeing reality for what it really is now. And you realize in that moment that my time has come. Now, let's start with a spiritual death. A spiritual death is a kind of death that occurs during your lifespan, in which there is a transcendence that takes place, where you cut off from the sensoria to gain a profound understanding of a higher reality. It's like one of the poets said, فَفَرِقَ الْحِسَّ الَّذِي عَائِقَ وَعَانِقَ الْمَعْنَى لَا يَحِلُّ فِرَاقُهَا فَفَرِقَ الْحِسُّ الَّذِي كَانَ عَائِقَ وَعَانِقَ الْمَعْنَى لَا يَحِلُّ فِرَاقُهَا. So he freed himself from the sensoria to embrace meaning, an embrace which he is not permitted to let go. In other words, once you come to realize that the individual, because once you come to realize meaning, which is the realm of ibra, right? إِنَّمَا الْكَوْنُ مَعَانِي قَائِمَةٌ بِالصُّوَرِ كُلُّ مَنْ يُدْرِكُ هَذَا كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِبَرِ. The world is form, the world is meaning erected as form. The form is the outward which is interacted by or interacted with by the senses. But what the heart is looking for is meaning, right? Once you embrace that reality, there is no going back for you. You see, you begin to see your perspective of life changes entirely. And death is one of those things. Once you embrace the concept of death, not in a morbid sense, and in fact, desiring of death is something that should only be done when you yourself realize or understand that you are in a state whereby you're ready to meet your Lord. It is in fact prohibited for you to say, I desire death, when you are going through turbulence or when you're going through any sort of problems or any hardships happen, something goes wrong and you say, I wish I was dead. You know, it's prohibited to say that. وَنَعُوذُ It's prohibited to say that. See? That desire is not in the sense of in a morbid sense. It is an embrace of realizing that there is more to come than just this life. So that now that when you look back at life, you see things in a different perspective. You see things as a different, in a completely different sense. That other things which are trivial and meaningless and menial and mundane, they're just there. They don't affect your psychology in that sense. This is something that strengthens you from within. It changes your psychology from within. Once you understand, and many people go through that. Everyone ultimately at one point of their life will have a glimpse or will venture thought or will realize their mortality. Everyone. Some will realize that in an early stage, others will realize it in a much later stage. Many others will realize it when they're right on the doorstep of death. Those are the worst. If you realize it at that stage, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you realize it at an early stage, realize your mortality, your breath, your existence, your life. It could be any moment. It could be tomorrow. Once you realize your mortality, it changes the way you see life. It changes the way you see your children, the way you see your family, the way you see your spouse, your parents. It changes the way you do things. It changes the way you perceive time itself, because we are time wasters. We waste a lot of time unthinking about the consequences of wasting all that time. So that when you are now on the very brink, you suddenly realize, oh man, I wasted. Can I please go back? Right? The guy who pleads with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, send me back. Let me do it once more. Let me try it again. Those who do not embrace this, they get a glimpse of it, but they want to deny it. And here's the thing. Everyone has a fear of death. The Prophet ﷺ said, everyone fears death. You'll find the hadith if you look for it. Everyone fears death. Fear of death is a rational thing, and it is a rational fear. In modern psychology, there's this movement now that wants to eradicate that as a rational fear. That they want to turn it into an irrational fear. It's something that should be treated psychologically, or you shouldn't fear death. No, you should, because it's a natural thing to fear death, but for the right reasons. Because a lot of people end up fearing death for the wrong reasons, and that is what prolongs and intensifies the pang or the pain of Sakarat. It makes it worse for them to transition, to leave this world. Things like fear of death in the sense of fear of pain. The Prophet ﷺ said that death is a fearful thing. The hadith that I just quoted. When you see a janazah, stand for it. Because death is the utmost pain, and the fear of the unknown is the utmost fear. You see? The fear of loss. The soul is a precious thing, is a precious entity. The fitrah of mankind is such that deep-rooted within the fitrah is a knowing that I am alive. I am existent. You're consciously affirming your existence. You're alive. What you would call self-awareness. Along with that comes the bid to maintain that state of being alive. So the soul recognizes itself to be a precious entity. This is why I say life is precious, right? Now, the soul is also clingy by its nature. It wants to latch on. Once it finds a comfort zone, once it settles in life and finds a state of comfort, it wants to cling to that. The fear of loss of that is what prevents one from transitioning into death much more easily, because it's a certain thing. You can't avoid it. Death is a certainty. There's no, this is what I said, there's this bid to try and overcome it or to try and change that. Or death is just a disease, we can cure it. Or we can just download consciousness in a hard drive, put you inside a robot, and then you continue living. Or we can cut off your head and put it inside a freezer, and then when we develop something, we're going to put your head on that. Kind of stupid things that these people are, their theories. And it's not just theories, they're actually trying to implement these kind of, silly things. That sort of fear, that sort of clinginess is actually a demonic quality, because for the soul to cling on to dunya, as the Prophet ﷺ said, Hubbu dunya wa karahiyatul maut, clinging to this worldly life is a demonic quality. One of the meanings of shaitan, in its root word of shaitana, is to cling or to latch on to something. Like a leech, like a virus. You see? So the soul clings to life and does not want to let it go. Does not want to let life go, to transition off into the next. Then there is a fear of meaninglessness. My life was meaningless. I didn't achieve anything. I couldn't, there's nothing for me to show. This is now when your dreams are being replaced by regrets. All that time you had, you wasted it. And then there is the fear of the unknown. Because the soul's most agitated state, the heart's most agitated state is in a state of not knowing. When you don't know what's going to happen next, or you don't know what's happening now, or you don't know what's going to unfold next, it makes you agitated. This is why people, when they get into some sort of a dire situation that triggers their panic. And panic is a sense of agitation. You don't know, you want to know, you want to try and find out. So you start doing, making rash decisions. You rush in with foolhardiness, trying to figure out what's going to happen next, or what is happening right now. You don't know. Death is the greatest unknown, because you don't know what's lying for you on the other side. You have no idea what's waiting for you on that side. Uthman ibn Affan, they say that once he was visiting the graves, and he started crying so much that his beard got wet. And one of them said to him, "We've not seen you weep this much, not as much as when the Prophet used to speak about paradise and hellfire. You're weeping so much for the graves." And he said, "I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that death, that state of existence in the grave, it's a transition into the hereafter. If that experience is easy, then what comes next will be easier. But if that experience is difficult, then what comes next will be even more difficult." And that's what made him emotional about it. Because you don't know what's waiting for you there. You have no idea what's coming up next. And that puts you in a state of fear of the unknown. And thus you end up fearing death, because you don't know what's coming next. You're afraid. I don't want to go. I don't want to die. Don't let me die. And then there is fear of non-being. And this is really the nihilistic approach, which is a sense of nothingness. Things have no meaning. Life has got no meaning. It really all doesn't really exist. We're just here, and then we're done, and then we're gone. The Arabs used to say, "Namutu wa nahya wala yuhliku illa ad-dahr." We live and we die, and then nothing annihilates us except time. A sense of it doesn't really matter. Life doesn't really matter. You're here, entertain yourselves, and then you're done. You don't really realize or put yourself in a realization of being. A lot of people think about life, but they don't think about existence. They don't think about being. They only think about life. My childhood, this is my memories. You look at your photographs. Okay, I did this, happy moments, blah, blah, blah. And then what's ahead for me, thinking 5 years down the line, get married, have a house, go do this, do that, my great ambition here and all that. You're thinking about life. but you don't think about existence. So that when the moment of death comes, now what? I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve. Am I really existent? Am I really, or is this end? Is this annihilation? Now, the physical death is easily ascertainable. The physical death, as far as the body is concerned. In medicine, you typically have 4 main indicators as to, and people can correct me if I'm wrong in this. You've got brain dead, where there is no brain activity detected. Then you've got heart death, where the heart itself stops pumping. And so there's no blood circulation and the body dies. You've got what's known as a nervous, a neuronal death, whereby the central nervous system stops functioning, puts the body in a state of a kind of paralysis that leads to death. And then you've got breath. The lungs stop functioning, there is no breath. Those are typically the 4 major ways in which death, as far as the body is concerned, can be detected. So typically they will look and see, is there any sort of cognition? Flash a light in the eyes. Are they responding? Is there a stimulus? Maybe they'll tickle the foot, the what is it called? The sole of the foot, to see if there's any sort of stimulus there. Or they'll check for breath. Is there any air coming in and out? Or for pulse, is the heart pumping blood or not? And then death would be declared. The main thing I want to look at is psychological death. Psychological death, this is pertaining our study, and so this is the main area that I want to look at. Now, there are typically 4 types of psychological deaths where it pertains to the soul. There is cognitive impotence, emotive dissonance, volitional routination, and intuitive paralysis. So I'm going to look at all these 4, and I'm going to read mostly from my own notes. So bear with me and I'll explain along the way. How much time do we have? We started at what, 5:30? Shall we have about half an hour? Okay, yeah, we'll finish inshallah. Now, cognitive impotence or impairment can relate to a loss of memory, cognition, recognition, confusion, poor motor skills, incomprehension, and so on. That's as far as the bodily aspect is concerned, but it relates directly to the psychological side, because remember, it's the connection between the intellect and the brain. So when you have an impairment in this aspect, it's going to affect the psychological aspect as well. Now, this can be due to any sort of trauma induced, something like a disease or an illness as far as the body is concerned, or maybe some sort of accident, someone got hit on the head and it caused this sort of impairment. But it can also be intentionally induced. The individual can put themselves in a state of cognitive impotence. Much of modern academics deny the soul in the spiritual sense, arguing that we are nothing but catabolic, anabolic states, just molecules. In other words, we just are machines that have this sort of higher sense of cognition. And so they only look at the bodily aspect of cognitive impotence. But people in this state essentially stop thinking. Now, thought is a spiritual exercise. It's not a physical exercise. The physical aspect of it, the using of the brain in this case, is as an instrument. The instrument being the brain that is used to formulate thought. But the actual thought, the actual thinking, the action itself is performed consciously by the soul. Now, this is where you'll find scholars will often interchange words. They'll use the word aql in relation to the soul when they're talking about the soul in a state of intellection. It is thinking. The soul, the being is thinking. Or they'll use the heart, the word qalb, or they'll use the word ruh when the soul is being spiritual. So insofar as the thinking is concerned, the formulation of thought, it's not just the intellect doing it, but it is a sort of a configuration between the intellect, the shahwa and the ghadab, right? But it is a spiritual exercise. It is not a physical or a material exercise. And so they stop thinking, either deliberately, where they simply lack the motivation to think and to be cognizant of their being and the world around them. Or this can be preconditioned and pre-programmed via any number of or channels of conditioning that would ultimately lead one to simply give up their cognition for a set of pre-programmed procedures and actions. In other words, they would be saying, just tell me what to do. Do the thinking for me. Just explain it to me. They don't want to exert mental effort into trying to figure it out. And oftentimes this is by their own fault of not keeping their cognition alive by stimulating their intellects. See, the intellect requires stimulation. Intellectual stimulation comes from learning, and one needs to be actively cognizant during every learning process. I'm not only talking about classroom learning. Every waking moment of your life is a learning moment, right? So it applies to both subjective learning as well as objective learning, or what you would say classroom and experiential. There's what you would learn from books and then what you would learn from the world around you. This is perhaps the key cause for cognitive impotence, as most are too engulfed by the ease of life and the fact that much of what would require active mental and physical effort is reduced by a heavy reliance on technology and other infrastructural amenities. Because we've got the ease of life, you see, we're living in an age whereby a lot of the things that require mental effort have been eliminated. You don't really require mental effort anymore. See, if you want an image now, you can just do it on what the thing is called, the AI thing is called, it will give you an image now. You don't have to physically draw it. You don't have to trial and error anymore. There are many things that now you no longer have to do in terms of exerting mental effort. Now, for example, if you want to heat up your food, it's a simple thing as putting it in the microwave. You don't have to light up a fire and put the pot or the pan on and then monitor that and then do a little bit here and that. There's no mental effort required. Now, each thing has got its own algorithmic function, but the action itself can be performed in multiple ways. And the issue here is that people tend to fall into a pre-programmed pattern, doing something only in one way and not thinking about doing it in another way. Try it out this way or try it out that way. Give it another shot. Maybe there's a simpler way of doing it. You see, all that has been eliminated by the presence and then continual advancement of technology, which is bringing about a comfort of life. And so the mind stagnates. There is no intellectual stimuli. Most will then go through life as automatons, functioning according to predetermined sets of instructions without really thinking about anything much other than functional matters. Because there is no intellectual stimulation, you tend to fall into a sort of a pre-programmed life. It just becomes press the button here, turn the knob there, take from here, put it there, you see? And then if you're encountering a situation which is new, because life, remember, is always changing, new curveballs will be thrown at you. If you had a chance to look at the hadith that I mentioned last session about the box that the Prophet ﷺ drew, and then the line internally, and then the segments, and he said these are a'rad, these are occurrences, these are events. If you miss this one, the next one will catch up. If you miss that one, the next one will catch up, right? So there's constant change. Now when people get thrown a curveball in this case, they don't know what to do. So because there is no intellectual stimuli to begin with, the mind is not active. So they'll wait until they have a set procedure to be given. Now this can be expanded in many, many different ways. I'll give you an example. A lot of people are still waiting to decide whether or not they should make hijrah to the Muslim countries from the West. And this is a fact. See, they acknowledge, yeah, Dajjal this, and the world is changing, and this is happening, and kufr here, and LGBTQ, and all this, and all that. They're still waiting. They acknowledge all that. That's fine. But they're still waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for that sign to come up. The big flashy sign that says Dajjal is here. Let's go. Or the big flashy sign that says the Al-Mahdi has come. Time to go. They're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. Whether it's the mufti in their masjid or so-and-so celebrity scholar whom they follow and they like on whatever. You see, they're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. They're waiting for a prompt. Without their prompt, they will not make a move. They'll stagnate. Because prior to that, even though there is some information being fed to their minds, there is no intellectual stimuli to think. The thinking has stopped. Is what like Sheikh Imran constantly says. People have lost the capacity to think. And so they're stagnating. Some will find stimulation, but not on conceptual or abstract matters. Rather, they will find stimulation in mundane matters and affairs. Things that often trigger destructive responses to dramas and theatrics of tragedies and comedies, or politics, or excitement in the repetitions of gossip, mostly under the self-assurance that it is for learning purposes or helping purposes, or we're just talking, it's not a big deal. We're just having a conversation. They'll find some sort of stimulation in these type of things, but not in abstract things, not in conceptual matters, not in deep thinking or critical thought. You see, that these are the things that will excite them. So they'll watch a 2-hour film, they'll get excited. The mind will start racing. But guess what? That's a temporal thing. It's meaningless. It's fabricated information. It's not true. It's not real. It's false imagery. So it passes and then they fall back to their state. Now they think that they're learning, but they're not. There's no learning taking place there because you're not abstracting reality or giving it conceptual thought. This also falls back to your children because children are in an abstract world. They are in an imaginal world. If you're going to give them forced information through devices and all that, it prevents their abstraction and imagination from really coming to fruition. You're actually inducing cognitive impotence at a very early age so that it then becomes permanent for them. Because they're not abstracting, the intellect is not being stimulated. And children require intellectual stimulation. They need intellectual stimulation. If they don't get that, then they're just going to, the lower self is going to take over. Because the intellect is still developing at that early age. As adults, you might not realize it as much because you've got an active lifestyle. You've got responsibilities, you've got things to do, you've got work. You see, distractions are everywhere as far as you're concerned, and some are justified. Some are genuinely justified. They have to be performed. But children don't have all that. They can't easily be caught up because once it takes place and they don't get that stimulation again and the intellect is not developed to find something else to do, the lower selves will take over. This is where you get your tantrums, you get your mood swings, you get all these kind of things. What one finds in such people is that they will also use theological matters to try and strengthen their discussions, referring to scriptures or sayings, which are also used as justifications of not doing anything wrong, or it's just a religious discussion, but are entirely neglectful of the fact that the core subject of their discussion is a mundane matter, not a divine matter. So you'll also find individuals that say, it's a trivial conversation that they're having, but they'll pull in citations from there and they'll say, the Prophet said this, and then, we're talking about Aqidah matters, but it's a meaningless conversation. It's not a real conversation. It's not actually giving them stimulation, conceptual or abstraction. It's just something that they've taken and the self justifies itself because it loves that. It likes to get caught up in trivial matters. This is why conspiracy theories are very appealing to people. People get very appealed by conspiracy theories because it gives a stimulation. It gives the mind something to try and probe inquiry into. But it is trivial. It's not real. It's not truth. It may have factual matters, but it is not truth itself. It is a subjective field, and those subjective matters, they keep changing. They are subject to change. They are semantics. What the mind requires as a directive from the heart is something that will guide it towards certainty, absolute truth. Without that, the mind is just going to stagnate. Or whatever it tells that the individual will find as a distraction, it will latch on to that. Of such people, the litmus test is very simple. If you want to test this on yourself or on others, it's a very simple test you can do. By presenting topics that fall under conceptual or abstract matters, things like language, art, sciences, or any such knowledge-related topics, and you observe if there is a piqued interest, whether they get excited when such a subject is introduced or such a topic is introduced. When you talk about anything that is maybe literature, about a book or something, about art, that's as far as liberalist arts are concerned, or sciences, something mathematical or physical thing, scientific, something like an experiment or something, whether or not they actually get excited when that thing, or do they get bored? Does it bore them? That's the litmus test. And whether or not the interest is retained on the subject, or does it eventually fade back into mundane elements that often intrigue them. In other words, they might be intrigued in the moment of it, but then there's no follow-up after that. They just fall back to their previous state. They don't come back around and say, oh, remember you were talking about this? I thought, I was thinking about, we'll say, when somebody says, I was thinking about what you said at that time, I was wondering, what about this? If you do it like this, that sort of follow-up thought, the afterthought is not there. So they might be intrigued in the moment, but then they fall back to their previous state. What can also be observed of them is their day-to-day functionality and whether or not they show signs of creative self-challenge by trying to do the same tasks differently, or showing signs of depression that life is stagnating, or else behaviorally being comfortable where they are. So in terms of observing their day-to-day functionality, when they're doing tasks, do they do the same task the same way over and over again? Because that would be indicative of their stagnation. Or do they find different ways or new ways to do those tasks? If they're doing that, if they're trying to find, okay, I did this in this way, well, what if I try to do it this way? And then they change the mannerism of that task that they're performing, is indicative of mental stimulation. They're actually thinking. They're actually trying to work it out, right? Or in terms of their state of depression. So while they are inactive, they don't have anything to do, they're sort of moody and broody. They're just there. They don't seem to be, nothing really around them gives them any sort of excitement or so. Or insofar as their behavior is concerned, they want to just remain where they are. They're comfortable where they are. They've got a set thing going on, a particle perception. They're happy. They like it where they are. They don't want to move forward. If life itself does not excite when something new is learned or known, there is a clear sign of disease which is leading to a psychological death. Particularly when it comes to seeking knowledge, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created man for no other reason than to know Him. Knowledge itself, however small or in small doses, should excite the human being. It should excite. Learning something new should excite you. If you go for Jummah and you're not even intrigued by what the Imam is saying in his khutbah, it doesn't prompt any form of thought. It doesn't excite you. Or you look at an ayah in the Quran and it doesn't give you any sort of exhilaration, then you've lost the purpose of life. You've disassociated yourself from the purpose of life. Because your entire purpose is to know. And all knowing must lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if that's not your direction, then you are not fulfilling the stipulations of the ayah. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ أو إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ. You're not fulfilling that. You're not being what you're supposed to be. You fall in the category of livestock. Bal hum adal ulaika humul ghafilun. You're in a state of heedlessness because livestock does what livestock is doing, but you as the human being, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. If learning something new or knowing something new does not excite you, or there is no follow-up of thought on that, you don't go back to try and think it out. Oh, I learned this. I wonder if it is like, or you heard in a lecture, the lecturer quoted ayah such and such, hadith this and quotation there, but you never followed up on that to try and see and do maybe some research. Where is that hadith? Let me read it myself. Or which ayah is it? Let me look it up. Or a quotation from book such and such. Let me go and see if I can find that book. You didn't do any sort of follow up on that. You got excited in the moment and then it died off. This is where people then start saying, I'm bored. I'm bored. See, with children, they like saying that a lot. They get a bit of stimulation. I'm bored. I have nothing to do. They watch a TV show or something, whatever is going on, and then the parent comes and says, okay, you've watched enough, now switch it off. Then what happens next? I'm bored. I don't have anything to do. I want food. Give me food. Can I eat this? Can I eat that? That boredom there, that is a sign of cognitive impotence. The one who says, I am bored, is one who has become too saturated with this material reality to truly experience his spiritual existence, something that can be felt in every breath. Because how can you be bored with reality? Children, by their nature, are never bored. Boredom is something that adults teach children, particularly through giving them artificial means of stimulation and not allowing a natural progression of stimulation, not allowing their ideas to be abstracted from reality, not allowing their imagination to flourish. If you allow children to just do things in a natural fashion without giving them any form of stimulation, artificial stimulation, you should give them other forms of stimulation. They do require it, Encourage them to draw, encourage them to paint, encourage them to read if they're able to. Play with them. Let their imagination run wild. Don't force feed information onto them through these screens and these monitors and these tablets and everything. Breathing alone, just ponderance, thought, feeling, looking at the horizon, looking at the sunset, looking into the night sky, just listening to the natural environment around you. These should all make the being wholesomely cognizant of his reality, of his existence. Just try to wonder how the birds do what they do. Just look into nature and observe. You cannot be bored in this state. If you're bored, you're in a state of heedlessness. You're in a state of delusion. Every moment unfolding is a revealing moment. Existence itself is an ecstatic state, and every moment is a moment of discovery. Therefore, to say I am bored is truly a pitiful remark for the human being, that he is indeed dead psychologically, and that is going to lead to his spiritual death. You're just going to be a body. You're just there, but you don't realize that you're there. That was cognitive impotence. Then there is emotional death. Emotional death can occur where the sense of love is typically only fulfilled by material and superficial aspects, by bodily erotics and lust, such that as time would wane and the physical attraction no longer excites, one finds a void where true love was never truly established. This is typical in relationships, marital relationships, where the relationship itself was originally not founded at a deeper level. Deeper connections were not established. Can I get a glass of water, please? Deeper connections were not established. And so everything that was built, as far as that relationship was concerned, was all superficial. just gifts and lovey-dovey and emoji text messaging and all that kind of stuff. I love you, my Janu Shanu, whatever. You see, it was built on that. It was a superficial relationship to begin with. But then what happens over time? That artificial, that material attractiveness, it changes. You don't have the same youth and that same beauty and handsome features and prettiness that you had before. You don't have that. Your spouse doesn't have that before. Now that it is not there, there's a void. It's empty. There's nothing. It's not there. And that now puts you in, because the true emotion, which is supposed to be mawadda, was not established. And rahma. Mawadda and rahma was not established. All you had was ishq and hub. I love you, my Layla. It was superficial. It was not a real love. And that's the test of it. The disconnect in some cases can occur within a very short period of time. And this is the case when young couples are only attracted to each other in the outward senses. Because they're young, because they're smart, beautiful, handsome, they get attracted to each other. Within a very short time, that attraction starts getting turbulated. And then there's nothing solid to establish a connection. And this is why you've got your boyfriend here, girlfriend there, girlfriend here, boyfriend there, jumping from here to there. It was never love to begin with. It was just puppy love. Where was I? Yes, and this is the case when young couples are only attracted to each other in the outward senses, who are ready for marriage as far as their physical abilities or resources permit, but are not quite ready insofar as their mental maturities and guiding principles are concerned. You see, they get married in a hasty fashion. They go too far. They just met each other 3 months, they want to get married. Which is fine if you know each other well and if you've established, a deep connection between each other. It's not about waiting to see if you are making the right decision. No, it's about whether or not you are actually connecting with the other person. If you don't find that connection, then you get hasty and start getting married, because prior to marriage, you're not going to see the other person's true nature. You see, this is a natural thing that we do, especially in our youth. We want to put our best self forward to the other person. After marriage, that best self gets diluted. You actually see the other person for the slob he is. Oh, he's not actually that smart, is he? He was just pretending to be. You actually start seeing the true nature of the individual and it hits you hard. This is not the person I was presented with. Well, you didn't take the time to learn that. You didn't take the time to figure that out, to read between the subtleties, the nuances, to establish this connection with the other person. So now you're being, this is not what I bargained for. And then you have a disconnect. In other cases, this can occur after quite some time, particularly when the marriage and the relationship was originally only built on material satisfaction through things, gifts, stuff. You see, the person was wealthy, so you got married to them. And then that maintained the marriage for some time. Now that individual has lost his job, he's lost everything. Now now the house is gone, now you're living in poverty. Now that's causing a disconnect, because the marriage itself was never built on connection between two people. It was only built between what the other person has. And a lot of people make this mistake, especially men, young men. You want to get married after you've got your house and your bank account set and your career has got its, its direction and everything is good. Now you want to bring a wife into the house. Big mistake. Big mistake. Because you're bringing the other person into a certain level. That level is not going to be maintained as a status quo for the rest of your life. You're going to go through turbulences. So you're creating a false image in the other person's mind. Then when you hit your rock bottom, and you never established a deep connection with the other person, they're not going to be there to support you. They'll abandon you. And this is what happens to a lot of marriages in the West especially. This is where divorces start. The guy loses his job, I want a divorce. You see? Or the woman gets a promotion or something, starts earning more than the guy, I want a divorce. It's amazing. Sorry? Mm-hmm.
Now it's parents even of the older generation are thinking that education is what will keep the marriage together because education, similar education level means that there's a mental compatibility.
Yeah, that's also a false.
And doctor my doctor.
Yeah,
High educated.
it's very dominant among like people from India, Pakistan, and stuff. The doctor. If the guy is a doctor, then I'll only find him a wife who is a doctor as well, so that they can relate with each other, so that they can think on the same wavelength, so that they are compatible with each other. That's a false flag. Compatibility in marriage is not built on social status. It's not built on in terms of what the level of education is. It's not built. True compatibility is built in a deep connection, individual to individual, person to person. You're not marrying the person's qualifications. And you find this a lot in those communities. They present a whole biodata, right? Then they start sending that out to their connections. Find me a wife, someone who can match up to that. That's false flag. It doesn't. If you look at the Prophet ﷺ, his first marriage was not based on that. It was not based on social status. And there is a fiqh when it comes to choosing a wife or a husband in that regard. But anyway, that's not really our discussion in this case. So the relationship was not built through deep, intimate connection, such that when the materiality runs out and the desire cannot be fulfilled, each one blames the other for lack of happiness. Because now the happiness that you had in your married life was sustained by material entities. Buying gift, going here, going to the restaurant to eat, traveling, all these material aspects. And then the funding runs out for that. Now you have a void that cannot be filled because those things are no longer there. So now you start doing the blame game. It's you, it's not me. It's your fault. You're like this, you're like that. In yet other cases, stagnation and lack of mental or emotive stimulation can lead to their impotences and dissonances, especially when one of the two desires change in the flow of life. When one of the two in that relationship, one person changes in the flow of life, while the other prefers the established comfort zone. So you reach a stage in your relationship whereby there's a sense of stagnation taking place now. You're not progressing. So one person wants to bring about change. Maybe the husband wants a career change. And it's a tough decision for them to make because he is going to have to leave his job, start a new business venture, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Naturally, the wife wants to support, but is not sure of that, or does not bring in the support at all. Wants to remain where they are. We're happy where we are. Why do you need to bring about change? So one individual wants to change. The other one wants to live where they are. They want to stay where they are. They don't want to bring about change. And then you've got a clash, a conflict. Both are hence spiritually desynchronized with each other and are disconnected in their collective thoughts. They're not thinking on the same bandwidth. They're not thinking alike. They're not on the same platform. One can become cognitively impotent, leading the other to become emotively dissonant, or vice versa. One can cause the other to react in the opposite manner. If one individual becomes cognitively impotent, wants to stagnate where they are, the other person may become emotionally dissonant again towards them, or likewise, you see, vice versa. In most cases, depending on the gender psychologies, and this is important because the modern world wants to eliminate this aspect, or we are all the same. Insofar as men are the same as women. No, they're not. Their psychologies are different. Depending on the gender psychologies, women will tend to close in on themselves, while men will attempt to revitalize their emotions through other means. This is not blanket towards the board, across the board, but the majority of it, women will tend to close in on themselves. They'll still their emotions. They'll not bring them out. You see, men will react in a different way, they will start trying to find other means. And this is where the unfaithfulness of men starts coming in. Brother will go and read a book of fiqh, talk to Mufti. Mufti will say, listen, you can marry 4 wives. Why you need to fix this relationship? Go find someone else. Yeah, that's what advice he'll be given. And it's unfortunate that people actually are given that kind of advice. Instead of, listen, try and work it out this way, work it out that way, do this, do that, do this, do that. Try and bring your relationship back to its youthfulness that it had before. They'll tell them, go and find something else. Where was I? In the case of women experiencing dissonance, they will often find the emotional need temporarily fulfilled by the presence of their children if they have children. If they have children, and this is again now a mistake on the part of the women, because rather than communicate it with their spouse, they will try to find a way to fill that emotional void through their children. They'll spend more time with their children. And the problem with that is that the reaction against the spouse will often fall on the children. Children will receive the love of the mother, but will also receive the wrath and the anger that is unleashed on them due to what the husband or the father would be doing, the spouse would be doing. And in either case, this often leads to a dissolution of the relationship, be it violent or be it mutual, be it conflict or you just decide to separate. Very rarely, however, although common in previous generations, but strong adherence to culture and tradition, but very rare in modern and postmodern generations, will the couple struggle to live it out or try and work it out for the sake of the children if they have children. But as society continually disintegrates into the postmodern status of individuality, where children are seen more as biological objects of procreation, children are not seen as meaningful entities insofar as many modern cultures are concerned. So they don't really take that into account. It's my happiness and I need to look out for my happiness, and therefore the person does not really think about the effects that will have on the children if the separation or if they're to go through the separation. In prior cultures, traditional cultures, many of the couples will try to resolve the issues. And by the way, if you actually sit down to think about it, the issues per se are not real issues. They are trivial issues. He said like this to me, she said like that to me. Today I woke up, this is what she did. That day he did like that and he did like this. You see, they're very trivial issues. They're not real issues. They're not so. It's not, unless you're coming to a qadi with a case like, okay, he was unfaithful. He went after another woman, or she did like this and like that, which I cannot forgive. You see, unless it's something real substantial, a majority of the issues can actually be resolved. They seem to be big issues because they are just compounded. They are compounded issues, so they seem to be big things. But if you actually think about it, they're not that big. They're easily resolvable. So if you take the time and dedicate towards resolution, you may find that in a majority of cases, you will not be faced with the need to cause separation, to cause divorce. In the traditional aspects, in the cultural aspects, many couples will try to work it out, or they'll try to just go through it, to live it for the sake of the children, for the sake of maintaining a home for them. This is not common in many of the modern cultures. For them, the children are whatever. I need mine and that one does their own. And so the children are left in a suspended state, depriving them of their divine rights of nurture and parenthood. Then comes volitional routinization, which is an intentional routinization or stagnation of life in mundane activities. It's different from cognitive impotence. You may have mental stimulation, but you just don't want it. You just don't want to get engaged. You want everything to be normal. You want everything to be, and your definition of normal is not really, it's normal insofar as your own projection of what normality should be. you want everything to be just routine. You want a set of parameters. They want established set of parameters that they themselves that do not exceed the boundaries of mundane efforts. In other words, they just don't want to make the effort. They are cognizant. They know that mental effort is required. They know that they can do more. They know that they have the potential to do more, but they don't want to do it. It's lethargy and laziness. Doing the same actions at the same intervals, in the same manners and the same measures every cyclical day intentionally, while maintaining those actions at the lowest required level of effort for the sole intent of keeping it that way, both resulting in a psychological and spiritual death. While this can be argued from the point of habits and behavioral patterns where routinization is key to disciplining the soul, and Islam would endorse a certain level of routinization such as the 5 daily prayers, wake and sleep times, fasting, recitation of the Quran, working, learning, so on and so forth. A certain measure of routinization is encouraged by Islam in your life. You need to have certain aspects where there is a routine insofar as your life is concerned, rather than just doing things in a haywire and haphazard manner. Now, this is for the discipline of the soul, and this is why it needs to be distinguished by the individual, not justified. Oh, I'm a disciplined individual. No, there is a discipline of the soul where routinization is required. What time you sleep, you wake up, you do your, whatever it is you need to do at certain times, maintaining those as a schedule of sorts. That's fine. But what this entails, volitional routinization, is doing only those things which are the bare necessity. I need to do A, B, C, that's it. And doing them in a fashion that requires the least amount of effort, mental and physical effort. Islam does not oppose the routinization of component tasks, but that the tasks themselves should not be of the kind that always yield the same results. You're just doing the same thing over and over again with the same results coming out of it. Einstein described insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. This is also a form of insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over again just so you can maintain the same results and the same amount of effort that you've been doing, because you're just lazy. You don't want to move forward. Prayer should induce a spiritual uplifting. Learning should excite the mind. Work should demand physical and or mental effort. The contents of the tasks should be ever changing to suit the nature of the soul, which itself is ever changing, because life is also ever changing. Life is always changing. The soul is also in a state of change. And so the tasks that you perform, even though the tasks are routine, should be changing in the aspects of how they are performed. They should provide some sort of excitement. They should provide some sort of stimulation. The soul is in perpetual motion through time, and every moment is a change leading to death, which itself is a change. Death is a change from a state of living to a state of dying. If the change is absent in the particular contents of the routinized tasks, the routinization serves no purpose. And the fact that it is volitional all the more worsens to the point of a psychological and spiritual death well before the term of life has ended. Because the tasks are routinizing, they are routine tasks, but they are maintained in their routine. There is no change that is occurring. You'll find a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he advised, go without food once in a while, break the routine. Walk barefoot once in a while, break the routine. Limit your sleep or break your sleep once in a while, break that routine. Put yourself in a state of change. But if you deliberately force the routinization, meaning it is volitional, then the routine serves no purpose. Because you want to maintain it in a state of stagnation. You're doing it deliberately. Ultimately, you die psychologically before your term of life has even ended. I don't remember who said this. Somebody can find this quote. That people die at 25 but live till they're 75 or something of the sort. They die at 25, they live until they're 75. In other words, when their youth reaches its prime, that's when life stagnates. So psychologically, spiritually, they're dead at 25. They're just living in the body insofar as the rest of their life is concerned. Go in mundane tasks. Wake up, brush your teeth, coffee, breakfast, get in the car. Benjamin Franklin? Yes, Benjamin Franklin. Thank you. Turn on the radio, same channel, computer on, email, phone ringing, hello, done, go for lunch, sandwich, done, go home, change, TV. And they love it. They want it like that. It's not that they're depressed. It's not that they're undergoing any sort of, emotional dissonance or cognitive impairment. It's not none of that. They're deliberately in that state. Then comes the fourth piece now, the final one. Intuitive paralysis, which is by far the worst of these four. Intuitive paralysis. The very essence of the being is breath. Both the body and the soul have a breathing that is likened to their forms. The body is breathing, expanding, contracting. The soul is also breathing, expanding and contracting. And this expansion and contraction is in harmony with reality. It entails losing, intuitive paralysis entails losing the very experience of being, not just cognitively, but emotionally, and consciously and spiritually. Being disconnected from the breath of life is being disconnected from life itself. And not only does the heart solidify and harden, it hollows out, leaving no substance within. You become a lifeless husk. You're existent, but you're not really existent. You're there, but you don't realize you're there. You're not being, you're just living it out. You're just going through your days. And it is the worst state. Now, when it comes to death, the best model I've found is Kubler-Ross's model of denial, bargain, anger, depression, and denial. And denial, because of all these aspects, denial is the thing that it's the greatest of that. It can actually put you in a state of intuitive paralysis well before your death. Because you're not thinking about death, or you know that it is there, but you don't want to acknowledge it. You're in denial of it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Every soul is going to taste death. That dhawq, that tasting of death that I mentioned before, is that tasting of its realization. Its certainty. Every soul is going to taste that, but you don't want to acknowledge that. This is you putting, and denial is kufr. Denial of any sort is kufr. Wailun yawma'idin lil mukaththibin. Woe unto those who are denying on that day. You will face it, and you will be forced to submit to that. But most people, they want to, and that denial forces them into these stages now. First, they will try to bargain at the moment of death. They will try to bargain. حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت in Surah Al-Mu'minun. حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت قال, he will say when death comes to him, رب ارجعون, send me back, لعلي أعمل صالحا, that I may do some righteous deeds, that I may go back and redo my life again. فيما تركت, in what I have left behind. You're looking back, the moment has come, you're tasting its realization, but you're in denial. You've been in denial all this time. This is it now. This is the thing that you are in denial of. There is no turning back. Kalla, there is no turning back. Innaha kalimatun huwa qailuha. These are meaningless words. They don't mean anything now. There's no bargaining at that moment. وَمَنْ وَرَائِهِمْ Barzakhun ila yomi yub'athun. Behind him now is a barzakh. There is a breach until the day he's resurrected. He cannot go back. You cannot return. So what do? You try to compromise. This is the stage of your bargain now. You see? You deny. No. You try to fight it. That's anger. You're trying to fight it. You're trying to go against it. You're clinging to life. You're holding on to it. That's anger. Anger is what's prompted when what you want is denied to you. As when you look at a child, I said this before, you look at a child, the desire is, I want, give me. And then the parent says, no. And the child utilizes the shahwa, utilizes the ghadab to try and acquire it. So the anger is unleashed, the tantrum comes out. The crying, the screaming, the weeping. It's the same psychology even insofar as death is concerned. Because the desire is to live. The soul it clinged to life. For whatever reason it might be, whether it felt that the being felt my life was meaningless, I want to go back and do something meaningful with it. Or I don't want to let go of life, I want to keep living. Whatever it is, that's the desire I want. Even those who know they're going to die, they'll try, and this is where all these like modern things are coming in, right? You know, trying to find ways to bring the guy back to life, save me, you know. And by the way, here's the thing, this is a modern concept as well. This idea that you want to try and find means. In the past, and it's arguable insofar as fiqh is concerned, but you'll find a hadith that support it, that a person has a right to die if they want to die. Not suicide. I'm not talking about suicide. I'm not talking about euthanasia. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about when somebody is inflicted by illness, a terminal illness, they have the right to choose if they want to be cured or if they want to pursue a cure for it, they want treatment, or if they want to accept their terminality and embrace that. They have a right to do that. They do have a right to choose if they want that or not. You see? It's all about whether or not you're ready to embrace death or not. And people in that state, especially when they're encountering this is their realization of their mortality. Like I said, you will realize it at some point or the other in your life, in some fashion or another. One way or another will make you realize your mortality. And when you're faced with that mortality, it is a question of whether or not you're ready to embrace it. And those who are not will try to fight it. This is prompted by their anger. You see, so your denial and then your anger, you're trying to fight it. And then what? Let's compromise. Bit of this, bit of that. Send me back. Let me try to do it again. Give me one more chance. That's your negotiating, your bargaining. Ultimately, you have to accept. And that is submission. The soul ultimately has to accept. It has to embrace it. One way or another, through willingly or unwillingly, because death is certain. You cannot overcome it. You cannot avoid it. And so then comes the Barzakh now. The Barzakh is the purgatory state of existence. You now cross over from the state of death, and now there is no going back. The soul has been separated from the body. It's still there insofar as the body is concerned. It is separated as the layers, the dimensions of reality, the heavens and the earth and all the interdimensions within are layered tibaqan on top of each other. So the soul is there with the body, but it is separated. It no longer has access to the senses. It no longer has access to the controls and the mechanisms of the body. And the ruh is taken out. The animus, spirit, is taken out. And so life is no longer there. The life is taken away. And so the soul is now in a state of purgatory, a state of timelessness and spacelessness. The soul enters the Barzakh. It will either be in a state of sleep, dormant and inactive, and it will experience a taste, a fragrance, or a sensation of the ethereal paradise, if its life was that of righteousness. Or it will be in constant turmoil, pain, and agony, and will taste a measure of the hellfire if its life was of disbelief, impurity, and transgression. This is the punishment of the grave. Adab al-Qabr. That's what Sayyidina Uthman was saying. That's what he meant. That this stage of existence is what now sets the precedence for what will follow. It's the beginning of the afterlife. It sets the precedence of what the afterlife is going to be. If it is easy, then what follows will be even easier. If it is difficult, then what follows will be even more difficult. And this is why part of the salah, during at-tahiyyat, we recite the dua. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabi jahannam wa min adhabi an-nar. Am I saying that correctly? ومن عذاب القبر ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر الفتنة المسيح الدجال. The adhab of Jahannam, the adhab of the qabr, the fitna of life and death. Because life itself has its own turbulences, and then death has its own turbulences. And then the fitna of Masih al-Dajjal. You seek refuge in Allah from that. Because in that state now, when you are in the grave, when it is constricting on you, because that's the nature of the grave, it is constricting on you, is when you're going to be asked those three questions. Man rabbuka, man nabiyuka, ma dinuka. And if your life was not fulfilling, meaningful, in the sense that you did not realize these with firm conviction in your heart, because you no longer have your brain. Your brain is not there. You're not utilizing your brain. There is no rationality in which you can try and figure out the answer to the question. If it's like this, then it's like that, then it's like that, therefore the answer might be this or that. You see, you can't do that at that stage. That knowledge, if it does not set into your heart when you are alive, then nothing is going to come to your aid in that state when you are in the grave, when those three questions are asked. This is why I say, they may seem like very simple questions, and many Muslims take it for granted. They dismiss this as a very simple question. You say, I can memorize this and then I'm good. No, it's not. If this does not set into your heart, the punishment is very grave, because this is what you are sent here to realize. You are sent into this realm, into this world, to realize this. Your Lord, the messenger He sent to communicate His message to you, and the ordinance by which you are supposed to live your life. And for each denomination, their messenger is so and so. For those to whom Nabi Isa was sent, that's his message, that's his way of life, that's what he embodied, that's what you were supposed to follow. You see, for each denomination, to every culture, every civilization, every people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, we have sent a messenger. So to each one, there is an ordinance, there is a sharia, there is an understanding, there is a conviction. Each individual, from the beginning to the end, from the first to the last, has to understand and realize the answers to these three questions. If they do not embody it within themselves in a state of living, then they will not be able to bring this out when they are asked in the grave. These are not semantic questions. They are testimonial questions asked to the soul in much in the same way as the question Alastu bi Rabbikum was asked in a state of mushahada. This is what it needs. It needs to be in a state of mushahada. The answers to these have to be testified upon, have to be witnessed upon by the heart, not by the eyes. To be witnessed by the heart, meaning to be understood, to be realized. They are not simple verbal questions and answers. In other words, the soul must have truly and deeply believed them in its heart and lived its life in accordance to for it in accordance to it, for it to successfully answer them to satisfaction. Additionally, the prayers that the soul performed will come to its aid as protective shields when bearing the punishments, which is why salat is more than just a physical action. It is a spiritual action performed by the body and the soul, and not a mere motion of rites and mechanical rituals. Death entails two things. Number one is the separation of the soul from its body, and number two is the removal of the ruh. So there's the removal of the ruh, and then there is the separation of the soul. When that soul is separated, the soul parts from the bodily world and then enters into the Barzakh. And that concludes our section on death. There's a lot more that we can talk about this. I wanted to focus more on the psychological aspect of it, and I hope that I did not flood everyone with information. So, inshallah, if there are any questions, we will convene after a quick break. Jazakumullah khairan. We'll see you in 5 minutes, inshallah. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All right. Questions, answers, discussions, inshallah. Yes. Roshan, I see your hand is up.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I had a few questions regarding death. I was waiting for this topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask one and then I'll let the others do ours and then we can come back later.
Sure.
From what I got in our pre-existence from the previous class, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in our existence in the material world, I guess our material world disconnects us from knowing Allah.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we arrive at death after we die, we again know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Am I correct in there?
Yeah, in the manner of knowing will differ. The knowing itself, yeah. So there is you're conscious of God. So you affirm that He is your Lord, and then that affirmation is part of your fitrah. But then when you enter into this world, and then immediately you're bombarded by the noise and the turbulences of this world, that sort of knowing tends to fade out. And this is why you have to be given reminders, and you have to try and remember. So when the infant is born, the first thing we do is to give the adhan, the iqama, and then to give something sweet, so that sweet can be associated with that remembrance, and then constant reminders throughout life to remember that. Don't get distracted by this around. Remember where you've come from. It will differ between the believer and the disbeliever. The kind of realization at the point of death will differ between the believer and the disbeliever. To say it in a more poetic sense, the believer will feel like they are reuniting with an old friend. Maulana Rumi gives a very good poetic elaboration of this in his Mathnawi. But the disbeliever it hits that person hard, because the disbeliever denied God, denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether he was a mushrik or whatever else he was, an atheist or whatever. It hits them really hard at that point. So the manner of knowing at the time of death will differ depending on which pathway was taken. But in both instances, there is a knowing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's a return back. We are seeing it in terms of a progression forward. That's our perception of time. But in reality, you've been sent here and you're going back to your Lord. So you're just returning back to your original point of departure.
Okay, so that's correct. Then us who would like to be euthanized is kind of a, I guess, stupid idea, because it says in the Quran that some of us would like to come back to the material world to rectify their material life, right? So that part of euthanasia should be ruled out for any of us, any of the human being on the earth. Now, in the process of death, so you have the removal of the ruh. I guess the removal of the ruh, the ruh goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the total and permanent separation of the nafs from the body. So now we have like our existence after death is in the nafs, I would believe. Whereas the ruh go back to Allah, so we do not exist in the ruh. Am I correct?
No, we exist in the sense, the core aspect of the human being is his ethereal body, which is the soul, the nafs, right? But we are a complete being insofar as body, soul, and spirit is concerned. At the time of resurrection, these three are going to be reunited again. You cannot be a human being unless you have all these three. So it's still part of your being. It's just that the ruh itself returns back to its Lord, and you are in a state of suspension. You're not in a state of living. And this is why resurrection it does not give you the real understanding of what it really is. But the Arabic term ba'atha really gives you an understanding, because ba'atha means to send back, to send, right? So he sends you back into existence. He sends you back into a state of living. And that sending back is a reuniting of the body, which is refashioned again. The soul is put back in, and then the ruh gives it its breath, and it comes back to life. So we're still existent as all three, right? It's just at the time of death, the ruh is taken back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until He brings you back. In terms of euthanasia, I just want to point out on that. This term euthanasia is a modern concept. Now, we don't have the time to discuss this, and it's also not part of our discussion, but it's an ideology. It will be discussed if we do the course on modernity and post-modernity philosophy, then that's where probably we'll look at that. But it's a modern concept. It's understanding of it, you see. And there are arguments as far as this is concerned to, especially in the West, as far as legalizing euthanasia is concerned and all that. And so far as Islam is concerned, the desire of death should only be in a state of righteousness. And that desire should not be death itself, but a return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the individual who is longing to see his Lord. That's a high state of spirituality, to be in that state of spiritual awareness, to want to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but shouldn't desire death because they're tired of life. That's not encouraged in Islam. Likewise, suicide that is related to that is also not encouraged. And the modern world has tried to distinguish these two, to say that euthanasia is a form of ending your own life on your own terms. I want to die at my given time, in my given mannerism. It's not prompted by anything. It's not driven by any sort of, I'm going through a hard period of my life. That is now where suicide comes in, when a person is in a state of depression or whatever, and they're having suicidal tendencies and they just want to end their life. That is also discouraged. The point that I was trying to bring to is that if an individual is afflicted by some sort of illness, for example, a terminal illness, or let's say they were in battle and they suffered a grave wound and they're barely clinging to life, even though that wound might be treatable, or that illness, there is a treatment that they can follow up with that, like cancer, for example, right? They have the choice to pursue treatment or to say, you know what, I just want to go through this as Allah has given it to me. I'll leave it in His hands to decide if He wants to, that also does not mean that you do not try to do any form of treatment yourself, because again, you're supposed to look out for treatment if you're afflicted by illness. My point was that the choice is still yours. You can't be forced upon it. You see, people tend to force the other person on that to try and they're not in the right state of mind, so I'm going to administer the medicine on them. You see, there is a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, they tried to feed him medicine even though he said, I don't want the medicine. And then when he came out of the fever, he got upset and he said, why did you give me the medicine? Particularly when I prohibited you from doing so. And they say to him, we thought that was just the fever that was speaking, we thought you were not in the right state of mind. So the person has a right to accept treatment to save them from terminal illness or something like that, not to end their life. The person has a choice to embrace death if that is what is on the horizon and they can see it. And there are many people in history who have done that. Einstein was one of them. You can look up Einstein's history story about how he died, his death. He accepted his moment. He didn't want to go through, there are many people who don't want to go through the crazy tribulation of things like chemotherapy and all that. It prolongs physical or material life, but destroys quality of life itself. And so life becomes meaningless to prolong at that point. Anyway, that's a totally different discussion. So, like I said.
Can I continue or leave?
Yes.
Opportunity to ask question.
Unless there's somebody else, and you can continue in the meanwhile.
I'll continue. My next question is, how can we reconnect ourselves to Allah in our material existence without going into a delusional state, like we say some of the Sufis go through? And there's one aspect of death, which is sleep, which is a minor death. I guess during sleep, we might be able to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the question is, in what state our nafs should be for us to know Allah when we sleep?
Okay, so for the first part, how do you know, how do you get to that state without, or how do you know you're in a delusional state or not, like some of the Sufiya end up getting into? This is with regards to going on a path of tasawwuf. And Sidi Ahmad Zarruq defines it as a sincere longing to be closer to your Lord. That's how he defines tasawwuf. And so all those scholars who encourage this, they put up a stipulation and they say that you need somebody who has already taken that path to guide you. Because that person knows, what the pitfalls are and what the obstacles are, what these different states might. Because you could be thinking you're having a spiritual experience, but you're in a state of delusion. How do you know? The person who is guiding you is the one who will be able to tell you, no, it's like this and it's not like that. That is also coupled with having a foundational knowledge and practice of the deen in its outward form, as well as a firm conviction in the heart, which keeps the intellect within its boundaries of performance. And that's why in the epistemology, the hadith of Jibril outlines for you the proper epistemology. First is Islam, and then is Iman, and then is Ihsan. You don't start with Ihsan. You see, you don't start at the top of the ladder. You have to build the foundation. You need to have the correct epistemology. And so Sidi Ahmad Zarruq says on that, the faqih must have tasawwuf, the Sufi must have a fiqh. And neither is possible without having Iman as the grounding point. You see, and this is a foundational principle. Ahamuha aqaidun thumma al-furu'u tasawwufun wa alatun biha shuru'. The first is your aqaid, your principles have to be laid, because that keeps your mind from going this way and that way. You could be having a logical thought where 2 + 2 = 4 as far as the equation is concerned, but you're off the path and you don't realize it. What you're seeing, you think that you're seeing true reality, or you think that you're closer to Allah, but you're actually further away. And then the branches of practice. If you don't have the practice in place, beginning with the fara'id and then the nafa'il, if you don't have those in place, then you can't be on a path of tasawwuf. That's not possible. And so if you're entering those kinds of states, and it's possible to enter those states, because you could sit there for, let's say, 2 hours in the dark doing Ya Allah in the, as constant, and you can enter. People do enter into euphoric states like that, because the word of Allah has its meaning. You see, it's not an empty word. It's not just sound. It's got meaning, and it can put people in a euphoric state. As far as sleep is concerned, going into sleep in a state of purity is ideal. You have your wudu, you've just prayed your salah, you're doing your adhkar, you're doing your awrad, and then you're going off into sleep. You're going into sleep in a state of purity. And so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits you, then your soul can come closer to the heavens, where you get a glimpse of His ordinance. And that's where true dreams come from. I hope I answered the question.
Yes. Jazakallah khairan. And can I continue or leave somebody else?
I think I see is there something in the chat there? Yes. Can you read it for me, please?
Regarding the hadith on al-Mawt, does the enemy also fear death, or has the fear of death been taken out of their hearts?
Does the enemy also fear death, or has the fear of death been taken out of their hearts? Yeah, the enemy also fears death. Everyone fears death, whether you're a believer or non-believer. The fear of death is a human thing. The fear that is been taken out of their hearts is the fear of the Muslims. If the enemy no longer fears death, why is that the case? No, the enemy does fear death, and that's why they're trying to do all these things, right? To try and conquer death, in the sense of preventing aging and all these things that they're the extending the life of the human being. This whole postmodern humanism, transhumanism thing that they have got going on. So they're also trying to conquer death, quote unquote, in different ways, mostly material ways, which themselves by their nature are finite. So if the instrument itself is finite, then whatever is resulting from the instrument will also be finite. You cannot have an infinite outcome from a finite premise. It doesn't work like that. That's illogical. If they do also, I can read that, yeah. If they do also fear death, like the Muslims, but do not fear the Muslims, does that mean that they do not fear death at the hands of Muslims, i.e. will live in peace or under a state of submission to the enemy? Well, the hadith itself is prophecy of the end of human history. The hadith regards our state of existence today. And the fear that is removed from the heart of the enemy entails that even though, because there are only those two aspects, right? Either the opposing force is bigger and stronger, or they are more in number. So it's not about numbers. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is clarifying. It's not about a numbers game. You will be many in number, and your numbers will keep going up and down. See, you've got thousands of Muslims converting, as they like to say, I converted or reverted or something, whatever it is that they say, to Islam. But they're not really Muslim per se. Many of them are just either celebrity kind Muslim, or influencer type Muslim, or they went to a Muslim country, they got, they liked the culture, and then they became Muslim somehow. And then when Ramadan comes, suddenly I don't feel like being a Muslim anymore, because they can't go hungry. So a majority of them are not really Muslim at heart. So it's not about a numbers game. It's about what it is, because battles are not really fought materially in so much as they are fought spiritually. You don't really fight with your hands per se. It's more about your heart and your conviction. What it is are you fighting for? So we either live in a state of peace, where in this case, peace is the wrong term. The right term is compromise. The right term in this case is compromise. We either live in a state of compromise or we live in a state of submission to the enemy. That's the reality of the situation. So does this hadith point to a time where we will be numerous Muslims living with peace agreements or under submission to the enemy? It's not peace agreements, it's compromise. Because peace is not absolute in this world. Peace is relative. And this is why they come to the table and they negotiate terms of peace and they establish a treaty which can go this way or that way. It's a compromise. You want to take an example? Anyway, I'll come to that. Could you scroll down there, please? Could this hadith also suggest that the solution to the problem of our enemies no longer fearing death at our hands is for this large body of Muslims to no longer abide by peace agreements which are actually agreements of submission in disguise? However, we should be faithful to genuine peace agreements which are fair. The immediate result of this would be mass death of the Muslims, but the long-term result would be freedom and a return to the... No, I mean, you're looking at this from a political perspective. It's not. The hadith does not relate to politics. The hadith is prophecy. Prophecy does not pertain to politics. What is being conveyed is the core message of the state of being, because al-wahan is a weakness. It's the weakness. It's the prime weakness of the human being in existence. And the prime weakness in this case is love of the world and despise of the hereafter. Preferring this over that. That's a weakness of the human being. The strength of the human being is in embracing that over this, is in wanting or desiring the afterlife over the worldly aspect. That's what's really being conveyed here. Now, that's the language, that's the essence, that's the meaning. That meaning is what formulates the thoughts of the people. And those thoughts result in how you perceive reality, your worldview, which then results in how you cultivate that reality. So if your internal language is imbibed with a meaning of hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut, if that's the language, that's the meaning that's imbibed internally, then your thoughts will be based on that premise. And then your worldview, how you perceive the world, will be based on that premise. So majority of Muslims are seeing the world in a materialistic perspective, in a secularistic perspective. I mean, this is going into philosophy now. But this is how Muslims are seeing it. This is why you're seeing all these changes that are taking place in the Muslim world. Why you've got all these rave parties in Saudi. You know, all these big concerts and they want all the flashy cars, the demonstration of wealth, gold-plated this and silver-plated that. They sit and food is like a whole mountain of food in front of them. You know, they eat little and then throw away the rest. I mean, this is one part of the world. You've got so many others. I mean, in the West, it's like, you know, if they don't get recognition from the secular, the non-Muslims, they haven't achieved anything. And this is why you find Muslims wanting to get into Hollywood, you know, and then get into film and media and these things. So now you find this sort of normalization taking place. This is something we'll also discuss in that philosophy. What is the concept of normalization? What does it mean to normalize? But you've got this thing going on now where there's some sort of inclusion that is taking place. So in many of these television shows and film and all this, you'll see a random hijabi somewhere in the background. Yeah? Or you'll see some Muslim brother somewhere doing something in the background, looking busy or something. And then Muslims get all excited. Hey, look, representation now. We have recognition now. Right? Or so-and-so Muslim brother, he's now into halal entertainment now. He's a halal rapper now. You see? He's singing songs that are halal oriented. So they get excited now. Using the same rhythms, and the same beats and the same frequencies that are of the sacrilegious world. And so they feel happy when they get, this is now them, this is the compromise. You see, this is now the love of the world and what the world is presenting. Because the perspective or the perception of reality, the worldview that is projected now, is oriented based on that language. Materiality is good, it's nice. See, the fiqh does not prohibit you from doing this. So they look at the fiqh, or mufti will pass fatwa and tell them it's not haram, so you can do it. As long as it's halal. So they come up with halal entertainment. You know, halal bacon. Halal wine now. There is halal wine. I saw somebody doing halal champagne now. I don't understand. Why do you need that? Why do you need to hold that glass the way they hold it? Why do you need to wear a tuxedo when you're getting married? Why do you need to wear the same dress with the white everything and walk down with flowers? Why do you need to do that? You're imitating them. And this is part of another hadith with the Prophet ﷺ. You will imitate them to such a degree that if they were to go down a lizard horde, you will follow them. And as you see this, it's shameless, the way Muslims are behaving. And this is how their worldview is projected. So this is how they're cultivating their reality. Because their language from the beginning has been corrupted. The essential language, where the worldly is preferred over the afterlife. Now, talking about compromise, I'll give you a very clear example as to the state of the Muslims in the world today. When all this Circus 19 took place, with all the regulation, government this and government that, what were the Muslims doing? What were the ulama, these celebrity ulama who come out? First of all, they come out and they start giving their Instagram messages and, you know, oh, I got my shot today. See, I'm very proud of him, and he's very proud of himself that he's done something marvelous. What were all of them doing? Each regulation that was passed, they accepted. There was no objection. They didn't come up with a counter argument. They didn't come out and say, no, we need to examine this more clearly. They said, close the doors of the masajid. They closed the doors. Put a notice outside, 10 people only. So when the 11th person comes, the guy is thrown out. No, get out. No, you have to wear the mask. You have to do 6 feet jamaat, 6 feet apart. And they're so proud of themselves. Posting all on the social media, Alhamdulillah, we did Jummah prayer today, 6 feet apart. This is compromise. Because they are no longer in awe of you. You are in awe of them. Not just in terms of fear, you admire them. You acknowledge them. Desperately seeking their recognition of you. And so you do whatever they say you should do. They are the puppet masters. They say dance to this tone, you dance to that tone. So
reacting and protesting against all this LGBT.
it's all folly. It's all folly. All these protests against LGBTQ and all this is all just this is Pepsi Cola. You see, it's just the fizzy the bubbles that come out of the soda. It's the fizzy. It dies out and then it becomes flat. Because you already compromised your position. There's nothing you can do now that will change anything. You already shown yourselves to be weak people. So whatever it is that they now come up with, whether it is passing LGBTQ or shoving it straight down your children's throats in schools, or legalizing it out in the streets, whatever it is that they do now, there's nothing that the Muslims can counter to that. Doesn't matter how much you protest, how many flags you burn, how many statues you bring down. It does not matter how many arguments you put out on Facebook, or how many memes you post, or whatever you send on WhatsApp. It doesn't matter, because these are the things, this is where the Muslims are now. You see, the pursuit, the preservation and the transmission of knowledge that was abandoned, that gave the Muslims meaning, that made the enemy fear you and be awe of you, has been removed. We did it deliberately to ourselves. There's no argument that we can come out and counter these kinds of things. All these Muslims, they want to go out there and start arguing these kind of ideological changes using aqidah. Oh, you know, the fiqh says this. No, Islam does not allow it. No, Islam says it's haram. These are ideologies. These are philosophies of the modern age. And people don't want to come out. They don't want to study. They don't want to learn. They don't want to bring themselves back to a state of knowing the state that the Muslims were in before that made the enemy fear you. So what happens when you are intellectually defeated and spiritually defeated? You will compromise your standing to the oppressor's whim. This is what it is. I'm correcting you here as so far as that was Mujahid. I saw his name there. Mujahid's question. It's not about peace or under the enemy's submission to the enemy. It is compromise and submission to the enemy. That's the state that we are in. We're not living in times of peace. We are not living in times of peace. You think that this is a peace agreement, or you think that because you have an American green card, or you've got whatever it is they give you in any of these other countries, you're living a nice life. You're not. You're under subjugation. You're under subjugation. Your way of life, your true deen, you may be performing the rites and rituals, but your true deen, your way of life has been compromised because you replaced the essential language of Islam with the language of the sacrilegious. And that language defines your thoughts. Those thoughts project a worldview from you. And then that worldview is how you are cultivating your reality.
If you don't mind, can you go through the topics we were studying today?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I saw that message earlier, but I saw it when we were on break. Yeah, so this is Numan, right? Yeah, is he back? Numan, are you back? I don't know. I can't see. Because I saw his message. He had gone out to pray Maghrib and then he came back. So anyway, he'll take a look at the recording, inshallah. There's someone's hand up there.
There's one more question.
Now we can come back to that. Maybe someone's hand up.
Volition and Shakira.
Yes, Sister Shakila, go ahead.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I have two questions.
Mhm.
One is about what to say, like if there's a death of some non-Muslim colleague, like we work together and then some of them, like their parents die or something, like what to say then? I was just thinking about the words that I should say or what I shouldn't say.
I don't know. Some of these things are culturally oriented, like the urf of a people comes in play as well. But as far as Islam is concerned, showing respect is essential. There's a hadith in which there was a funeral passing and the Prophet ﷺ stood up and one of the companions said, "Ya Rasulullah, it's just a Jew." And the Prophet responded to that and said, "Is he not a soul?" In other words, whether he's Jew or Christian or whatever, some respect should be given. So, offering condolences to non-Muslims who passed away as well, out of respect and showing that respect as well, is part and parcel of demonstrating what Islam really is about, and also, acknowledging death itself. And so far as what to say, I'm not sure who they are, who the individuals are, what are the customs. Some of these things are determined by customs. So in the West, simply saying my condolences to you and your family suffices. To
Can you pray for the forgiveness? Like in one of the hadiths, I read about when this Najashi died. And then it's a hadith from Sunan Nasai.
Yeah.
And the Prophet said, pray for forgiveness of your brother.
Yes, you can. You can pray for them. You can offer dua for them. Allah accepts it or not, it's upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you can pray for them. There's no prohibition on that. The only prohibition is to perform salatul janaza for someone who is a mushrik. An idolater does not get salatul janaza, but someone who is, let's say, from among the people of the book, for example, Jew or Christian, even that there is a khilaf among scholars as to whether or not you're allowed to do janazah for them or not, but that's in its place. But yes, the Prophet ﷺ, he did perform janazah for King Negus. So, and there are people who dispute that, say, no, it never happened, or this or that, the hadith is like that, like that. I mean, I don't get into those kinds of debates. Knowing the Prophet's character and knowing what transpired at the time when the Prophet ﷺ was in dire need, and the Muslims were in dire need, when someone who is not even of his own people accepted and took them in and gave them shelter and gave them protection, the Prophet ﷺ would not just negate that completely and dismiss that off and say, oh no, he's a kafir. No, he wouldn't do that. So, you can do dua, you can offer dua for them. It's fine.
Second question is about the book that you recommended, this Life of Man from Imam Haddad. Yeah. So, maybe, I don't know, what is the reason of selecting this book? The main thing that was in your mind that we should have this concept or this idea from this book.
Okay, so the concept itself, which is a thematic representation, is not a new concept. It's always been a foundational concept. You can find it in the Quran itself that gives you all these 5 stages. And many of the scholars have used this thematic representation in their texts. So, I mean, we did Imam al-Ghazali's text, the Kimya, and in there he gives you something about the pre-worldly stage. He talks about the stage of life. He talks about death. He talks about dreams as a minor death. He talks about the afterlife. He talks about damnation and eternal bliss, which is now eternity. So this thematic representation, you'll find it in many of the texts. Imam al-Haddad was a scholar who really understood, I mean, in my view, is one of those scholars who really understood Ghazali's approach. And he sort of simplified this into his own words. So I found this to be a very simple text that you can use to study. And you can just read the book that's there, that's been published, the English translation. And it gives you an understanding of a broader perspective of existence, not just life itself. Like I mentioned in last week's session, having a broader perspective makes the mundane seem very insignificant. It doesn't bother you anymore, right? So it gives you a more profound understanding of your being, to know that you've come from somewhere and there's meaning and purpose behind that, to know that you've been sent here for a purpose, not just by the by, to know that your death serves a purpose, to know that resurrection itself has a meaning and a purpose, you see, and that there is an eternity after that. That puts you in a certain psychological state. And I wanted to examine just this portion of the worldly aspect, a state of existence, which includes life and death. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I think it's in Surah Al-A'raf, what's the I can look it up. Yeah, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Surah Al-A'raf, فِيهَا تَحْيَوْنَ وَفِيهَا تَمُوتُونَ وَمِنْهَا تُخْرَجُونَ. Therein you have to live, therein you have to die, in this worldly aspect. فِيهَا تَحْيَوْنَ, therein you have to live, وَفِيهَا تَمُوتُونَ, and therein you have to die. وَمِنْهَا تُخْرَجُونَ, and then from there you will exit from this worldly stage. So I wanted to look at life and I wanted to look at death. The stages of life and then what pertains death. No.
One last question, small one. When we ask forgiveness for our parents or we praise something for them, do they receive it as they know it, like it's by this one or that one? Yeah, they are not disconnected in that sense. The dead are not completely disconnected from the world of the living. They just can't interact with it. So the dead hear you. I mean, there is an argument among many, like it's a modern argument among the neo-Salafi movements, which has its merits insofar as praying, especially at graves, because it is dangerously close to grave worship.
itself. But offering the dua in this case is not missed. They hear it. They hear the dua and they're not completely disconnected. There are many accounts of people who have been visited in their dreams by people who passed away. Right? I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, he comes to the dreams of many people, even though he's not in the world of the living. That doesn't mean he has died in the sense of annihilation completely. And by the way, it needs to be understood, death does not mean annihilation. Annihilation is complete removal from existence. The terms here are very critical because understanding the terms are very crucial. Death does not mean that you are completely removed from existence. Death is just that you're not in the state of living. You're in a different state, but still existent, and you don't have access. There is a barzakh, a barrier or a breach between where you are and where you have come from. But that doesn't mean that you can't hear or see what's going on there. So they do receive your du'as, and this is why you should never speak ill of the dead. Speaking ill of the dead is because it turbulates them. And it stains them, it stains their soul. One of the profound things you'll find about Nabi Isa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will purify you from those who throw kufr on you. See, now for 2,000 years, they have been throwing kufr on him. Son of God, Holy Spirit, all that stuff. That's all kufr. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, I'm going to purify you from that? Because that kufr affects the soul. You see, it stains the soul. It darkens the soul. Speaking ill of the dead, those who have passed away, speaking ill of them stains them, it turbulates them, it upsets their state that they are in, right? Which implies that they are able to hear you. So if you send glad tidings towards them, remember them in your dua, they will receive it. They will receive that.
Jazakallah khairan. It's there are many questions that are coming on and on, but I don't know, is it possible to have just one lecture on how, like when we die, after that, like how is the process go on, and many questions about like deceased one and like one I asked now, like can we do a session of that, like
Inshallah.
Information of
Inshallah, we'll work.
Maybe people have
No. Inshallah, we'll work something out on that. I know I still owe you guys a different session on a couple of other topics, but it's all based on my schedule. So we'll see how we can set up a time or something.
Because I have questions. I like in Imam Jalaluddin Sauti, I have read that he said about like if you the best is to read the Quran for your deceased one.
Yes.
And also in this book, like it says, like if somebody dies on Thursday night, then it's on the Friday.
Yes.
So it's giving protection against the torment of the grave.
Yeah.
So these are things that I just want to like.
Yeah, there are many things even highlighted in that book. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to go into it. It's a very lengthy topic, and we don't have the time to go. That's why I didn't use the text. Yeah, so maybe we'll do something, maybe a proper number of sessions just to go through the whole text properly and fill in those gaps. Yeah.
Inshallah.
There's a question on the thing.
At death, a veil is put between the earth and the veil, but the veil to the unseen is removed, so he sees the truth. What remains with the person in his grave, by which he feels pleasure or punishment?
Is it the soul, the
What
rule?
remains with the person in his grave, by which he feels pleasure or punishment? Is it the soul? Do the rules gather in this decay of
Mhm.
die before resurrection?
Okay, so yeah, what remains with the person feels pleasure or punishment? Is it the soul? Pain and pleasure is felt by the soul. It's not felt by the body. The body has its own delight, but the actual pleasure that is acquired from them, or the agony, the pain, is felt by the soul. And this is why you find people who do like higher martial arts or higher meditative states, they tend to be able to master the pain threshold because they're able to withstand. So even though the body has got its reactive aspects of the nerves, and the communication between the receptors and the brain, the soul can learn to absorb that pain. The pain is felt by the soul. It's not because the body doesn't know pain and pleasure. These are abstract concepts as far as the soul is concerned. The body doesn't know what that is. The being knows what that is because that's something that the soul experiences, right? So in the grave, that pain or pleasure is felt by the soul. The pain is a constricting of the grave, and that's the main torment of the grave. It's a constriction. The pleasure is an expansion because the soul is an expanding and contracting entity. You see? So the pain is something that is contracting. It's closing in on the soul. And the pleasure is the expansion of the grave. It feels more roomy. There's more space. It's hard to describe that. It's not about the physical dimensions of the physical grave. It's about the state in which you are in. No. What's the other one? Do personality types
like introverted, extroverted, alpha or beta play a role in how a person becomes complacent in life and how to get themselves out of that superficial lifestyle?
Exactly, yes, they do. They play a role. So if somebody puts themselves in a certain state, in that sense, it is serving the soul's purpose, right? So people will develop they're actually people who will develop inferiority complexes because they like being in a state of depression, or they like receiving pity, or they like receiving sympathy. So that determines the kind of lifestyle that they have. Others will actually try to put themselves, as I was saying, in like an alpha role, the go out and get it type of person. And these are, I mean, you'll find a lot of these motivational videos and speakers, they try to get people uplifted in that sense. Be a doer, don't be a wisher. And so they try to be dominating in the lifestyle. If I want something, I go out and I get it. I just go for it. Yes, it does. And these are what you would call extremities in life. You're taking on an extreme role. Islam does not encourage any particular type of role. Islam encourages a balance of all that. You see, there is a balance between being extroverted and introverted. A balance between the two is what's encouraged. There are times when you should be outgoing with people and the environment, and there are times you need to be reserved. You need to be by yourself. You need to hold yourself back. People who like attention seekers, will develop themselves into extroverted personality types, even though that's not their inherent temperament. Yeah. Question. Let's do Dhafar, and then we will go to Roshan and finish up, inshallah. Yes, Mr. Tim, how are you? Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam.
كيف حالك أستاذ؟
الحمد لله وأنت؟
ما شاء الله. أستاذ, as you said, it's forbidden to desire the death, and likewise, what about the desire for long life? Because how to find the balance between them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if using even Sina's and the other, let's say, professors' approach regarding health issue, I mean, proper eating, physical exercises, and so on. For instance, my grandfather is at age of 80.
MashaAllah.
He's in good shape. So at the same time, for example, not desiring too long for a long life, but searching for the balance. Most unfortunately, nowadays in our age, it's a corrupted age by Yajuj, Majuj, especially in medicine. So most people have a health issue.
Yeah.
So as you explained, I have went through such desires which you explained. So the next what I want is, so using the approaches, So it keeps in my mind. So using the approach, for example, I mentioned, for instance, it could give a long life for a person. So how to deal in this case, to have balance between both, not desiring, death and also the long life.
No. The desire for death is not so much as a desire to want to die, it's more of an embrace of death, an acceptance of it, a longing to want to return to your Lord. It's not the death itself that is desired, the desire is to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is encouraged to want to desire long life, not for the sake of living, but for the sake of wanting more time to be more righteous. And so it falls back to a foundational principle in Islam, which is innamal a'malu bin niyat. Actions are contingent on the intentions that are formulated, because it is the intention that determines what the outcome is going to be. وَلِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. And so each person will get what they intended. So it's for what intention do you want long life? Or for what intention do you want death? People want death because they can't tolerate life. That's not going to give you any reward. It's to say, yeah, I desire death. See, I'm not afraid to die. No. People desire death to want to return and return to their Lord. That's a good desire. It's not a bad desire, but it's a longing for returning to the Lord. That's the intention, right? That's what is going to get fulfilled. At the same time, people want long life just so that they can have more entertainment and they can have, advance in their careers and ambitions and all these things. That's not a good desire. But then there are people who want long life and long life is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, Islam encourages you to desire to have long life so that you can do more with your time, to learn more, to study more, to do more righteous deeds, engage with the community, to do more ibadah, to do all these things so that you can do more. That's a good desire.
Understood. One more question, sir, regarding the children and marriage. So, from my experience, that children get a new habit after explaining, repeating for something continuously.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it good to encourage them and repeat them regarding the marriage? For instance, not, as you say, not to have, for example, a house, a car, but to gain all those with the spouse which they are going to get married.
Yes.
And the related to this, you didn't continue the fiqh about marriage which you started about our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Also, could you please explain it?
Okay, the fiqh will take too long because it's very broad. It's a whole chapter on marriage, on fiqh. If you want, really, I would recommend you look at Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin on the book of marriage. He explains it very well. It's a very long section. He gives you the spiritual aspect as well as the fiqh, and then it's usul. What is its meaning? And so far as the youth are concerned, yes, you should encourage, because marriage takes precedence over the materiality of it. The bondship takes precedence over the materiality of it. Many of the youth are encouraged more towards, okay, finish your education and then get your degree and then get your whatever and then get your this and then get your that. Next thing you know, they're 30 years old, 35, that's when they're getting married now. You see, the mindset has changed. The youth is already passing off. There's not much left in terms of marriage itself. And then there is the biological aspect insofar as now longevity is concerned, leaving a progeny behind. You see, it becomes a lot more difficult at that age. Encouraging them to get married at an early age is a premise in Islam. When they reach that age of reason and that age of puberty, when they're now able to understand, because it's that section now, the last 7, the third 7, right? Play with them for 7, discipline them for 7, that's up until the age of 14, and then advise them for 7, that's up until the age of 21. That section there from 14 to 21, that's a ripe age for marriage. You see? So getting this into their mode of thinking, because that's also the age. Now when you examine it from a sociological perspective and a political perspective, you see the environment is not a safe environment for that age. It is not a safe environment at all for that age, especially in, I mean, now it's almost everywhere in the world. It's really unavoidable. But the idea of university and college life, it's a very decadent idea. These people, they don't go to these institutions to acquire knowledge. It is for the experience of it. You see? And I mean, it's disgraceful, it's shameless, the kind of lifestyle that they live. And it's a very delicate stage, and it can tip. Because once the person tips over, there's no return from that. You see, once the deed is committed, there's no return from that. So that's a very crucial age to start engaging in these kinds of, to entrain. This is called entrainment of the mind, to entrain them, not to give them a set rule, guide, you know, the Islam says you have to, otherwise it's haram, and no. The fiqh in its place, explaining the rules to them in its place. But to get them thinking along these lines, thinking about marriage, about companionship, about family, about progeny, about legacy, about all these integral aspects. You see, it's not just about sitting down and exchanging rings and the ceremony is done. That's not marriage. That's a wedding. That's a ceremony. It's just a wedding. That's not marriage. Marriage is lifelong. And if it is not entrained in the early stages, particularly before the marriage, to go into the marriage with a certain mindset, then you're looking at disaster. So it is advisable, highly advisable at that age to start getting them thinking along those lines. You see, because yes, they will have these urges, these sexual urges, these desires, which also have to be disciplined in the middle 7. The shahwa and the ghadab. Adibuhum bisab'in means disciplining these 2 aspects, the shahwa and the ghadab. You see, but they're going to have these urges, and they need to understand what it means to control those urges, what it means to remain chaste, what it means to abstain. Why are you doing that? Why are you abstaining yourself? Why are you preserving your chastity? For what purpose? For what reason? The urge is there, the temptations are there, and it's much more blatant and open now. It's very difficult to avert your eyes. It comes to you in all aspects. So they need, this is very crucial, a stage that they need. This is why advise them for these 7 years. You need to advise them, you need to counsel them, and counseling is repetitive and it's ongoing. Don't put down a set of rules and throw a couple of hadith and this is what the Quran says and you have to do it. They won't. They will rebel against that. And it might even end up taking them out of Islam, just because of that.
Jazakallah khair. Barakallahu feek.
No, Jazakallah. Yes, Roshan, last question and then we can finish inshallah.
I hope you're not too tired now.
I am a
Make
bit
it
exhausted.
short for you.
Yes, it's Maghrib actually
I'll make it
for
short
us.
you,
Yes.
It's a difficult question, I'll make it short.
No.
So basically the knowledge of Allah is still with us in our material existence, but the material world has disconnected us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
So now to be reconnected to Allah in our material world, what I came up with is this flow. We need to love Allah. And to love Allah, we need to love the Rasul. Now the Rasul is not only Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the previous Rasul that came before him. Now to love the Rasul, we need to know the Rasul. Now to know the Rasul, we need to follow him. And to follow him, we need guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to get guidance, we need to know and purify our nafs.
No.
Now, to know our nafs, I guess we need your class. So you're doing a great job, and alhamdulillah, and I congratulate you, and I thank you so much, even for helping me. I can testify to it while I'm still navigating the tasawwuf sea presently, and you kind of guiding me to know my nafs to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
No.
Now, the part of now purifying your nafs, what advice would you give us to purify our nafs?
Purification, there's no set rule per se insofar as taking on that. The purification itself has got multiple aspects. One of those is discipline. I would say that the first step would be a step of self-discipline. In many of the Muslim universities, one of the primary texts that is typically covered will always pertain to the adab of seeking knowledge. And that adab is the discipline of it. So anything that you want to pursue requires its own discipline. It's okay, we're finishing up anyway. Yeah. So each step that you take has its own discipline, and that's the discipline or self-discipline of it. So it begins with, first of all, recognizing the hierarchy within you. Who are you as a being? Are you your body? Are you your soul? Are you your extensions, your limbs and senses? Who are you? And then what is the governance internally? Because each thing in existence has to have a governance, has to have rules by which it can be governed. How is that governance maintained? And then recognizing now what is required insofar as maintaining that governance. So the discipline aspect is the foremost, and it starts small. You don't need to climb up the ladder and do, enter into the religion step by step, but take the step. Don't take the whole religion onto yourself at one go. So if you're praying your fara'id, or if you're not praying your fara'id salah, start with that at least. That's the first step of disciplining, at least establishing the prayer. And, then once you've, at least got that going, then start taking on the nafilah and then establish that as well. See, if you are not doing, let's say, people argue whether you should do dua after the salah or not. Do that. If you're doing 2 duas, maybe do 3. If you are reciting the Quran for 10 minutes, maybe extend that to 20 minutes, extend that to 1 hour. You see, that progression now is it's slow, in terms of you can regulate yourself how fast you want to progress, but you need to do that. You need to take all the branches of practice and start implementing the branches of practice. So, aqaidun thumma al-furu'. The aqaid, establishing your principles and your aqidah, your conviction, your belief, and then the branches of practice. The branches of practice will help you discipline the self. And that's the first step of getting into a path of tasawwuf. So tasawwufun comes after that. Then wa'alatun biha shuru'. Then take an instrument and take on a path. If you want to do charity, then take on that path. If you want to seek knowledge, take on that path. If you want to help the community, maybe as a physician, take on that path. Whatever path you want to take on now, take on that path and maintain it. Maintain the course. Purification of the soul is going to take time. It can take years until you reach a place whereby when you reflect back on your life, you're able to see change and progression. You're able to see a different person at present than the person who was there in the past.
Should start with proper, for example,
Sorry, come again?
obligations are you can't do charity or full-fledged charity if you have an elderly parent or grandparent which you're neglecting.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, fulfilling your duties. Yes, yeah. You can't go out and take on the world when you've got no stability in your home.
Even if
Charity begins at home. So charity is what you're saying is,
to
yeah,
go and look after them.
yeah.
Like,
Charity, as we say, begins at home, right? So if you're taking, let's say, a path of charity, then you're going out to feed 1,000 people makes no difference insofar as purifying yourself when there are people suffering in your home. No. So you need to take it step by step. Don't jump this way and then, because then you're just jumping this way and that way. You see, just shifting lanes, you're going fast, you're going slow, you've got no... You see, training is a gradual thing. You ask any athlete will tell you that training, you cannot be a pro on the onset. Even though you may have the talent, training is a step-by-step thing. You start gradually and you go one by one. If you want to seek out knowledge, yeah, if you have the money, you can go to the university, but you're not going to start 4th year. You know, you're going to have to start from scratch. And it's a very difficult process. You want to learn language, it's not going to come just like that to you. You read a couple of dictionaries and you're done. Or you attended a couple of classes or watched some YouTube videos and you're done. No, it's a long and slow process and it takes a lot of practice. And this is why he talked about tajriba. You go back to the text, Imam al-Ghazali's text, we looked at that section, tajriba. This comes to one who is consistent in his practice and continually trying, is when now you're going to start getting the openings. Those openings will be indicative of a milestone in the progression of you purifying yourself. Now, so anyway, let's end here because the time for Maghrib has come and I had the adhan almost 5 minutes ago. So inshallah, we'll convene next week for the last session of our sessions. And then we'll decide after that if we want to have maybe another session just for questions and answers or discussions or things that have been missed. We'll decide after that, inshallah. So next week, we're going to look at Ayatul Nur. We're going to do a bit of a more detailed analysis on that. So I will advise everyone to prepare beforehand, write down the ayah. If you want, you can put down Sahih International Tafsir, not Tafsir, the translation in there to help you. Look at some of the tafsirs that are there if you have the time, go through that. We're not doing a tafsir on the ayah. I just want to speak on the ayah in so far as our subject is concerned, psychology is concerned. This is the closing of Islamic psychology. We started with the outward, we're now going to the inward, the most spiritual aspect. So, inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين بارك الله فيكم جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته and I will see everyone next week inshallah جزاك الله
بارك الله فيك.
جزاك الله